In April 1945, the most powerful battleship ever built, Japan's 72,000-ton Yamato, was dispatched on a suicide mission to Okinawa. American reconnaissance aircraft spotted the vessel 200 miles from its destination. What happened next defied military logic. Within just 10 critical minutes of the American airstrike, the pride of Japan's fleet was fatally crippled, despite its unprecedented armor and firepower. Today you'll discover how American air power rendered the most formidable surface vessel in history completely obsolete, changing naval warfare forever. The vessel that cost Japan the equivalent of $1 billion modern dollars and took 3 years to construct would be neutralized in an operation that demonstrated America's absolute mastery of naval warfare's new paradigm. The Yamato's demise would become the ultimate symbol of America's technological revolution, a revolution that remains the foundation of our global military dominance 8 decades later. As you'll learn, this wasn't merely a victory of American industrial might, but a testament to the comprehensive superiority of American strategic thinking, technological innovation, and tactical execution that would reshape the future of warfare in ways that continue to reverberate throughout military establishments worldwide. The final months of World War II presented a stark contrast between two naval powers. Japan, clinging to traditional naval doctrine, had invested immeasurable resources in the Yamato, a floating fortress with 18-inch guns that could fire shells weighing as much as a small car. The vessel represented the pinnacle of battleship engineering, with armor plates so thick that no conventional naval gun could penetrate them. Its main belt armor measured 16.1 inches thick, approximately the length of a man's arm, and was engineered with a special steel composition that Japanese naval architects believed made it impervious to any weapon. Documents recovered after the war revealed that Emperor Hirohito himself had been assured that the Yamato represented an unsinkable fortress that will reverse our fortunes in the Pacific. The psychological significance of the Yamato extended far beyond its military capabilities. It embodied Japan's national pride and martial spirit. Japanese naval officers referred to it as the floating shrine, a sanctified embodiment of imperial might. Naval strategist Takeo Kurita had proclaimed during its commissioning ceremony, "As long as the Yamato floats, Japan cannot be defeated." This mythological status only magnified the psychological impact of its eventual destruction. Meanwhile, America had pivoted to a revolutionary approach. Fast carrier task forces projecting power through aircraft. Where Japan had concentrated resources in a few supremely powerful vessels, America had distributed its strength across multiple carriers, each projecting the equivalent firepower of an entire fleet through their air groups. This philosophical difference would be tested in the waters south of Japan, where American forces were preparing for the invasion of the Japanese mainland. The Imperial Japanese Navy, desperate to reverse their fortunes, planned one final, decisive engagement. Operation Tengo, as the Japanese code named it, would send their super battleship on a one-way mission to Okinawa, where it would beach itself and become an unsinkable artillery platform against American invasion forces. Admiral Toyota, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, justified this desperate strategy in a message to his officers. "The fate of our empire rests upon this single action. The Yamato will demonstrate that Japanese spirit can overcome American materiel." In 10 minutes, you'll understand how Americans transformed this apparent naval mismatch into one of the most lopsided victories in military history. The first indication of American superiority came at dawn on April 7, 1945, when a PBM Mariner patrol aircraft spotted the Japanese task force moving through the East China Sea. Within minutes, this intelligence was relayed through an advanced communication network to Admiral Raymond Spruance's Fifth Fleet. Unlike Japanese forces struggling with limited radio capabilities, American commanders immediately comprehended the strategic situation. The U.S. Navy had pioneered combat information centers aboard vessels, dedicated spaces filled with plotting tables, radar screens, and communication equipment that allowed for unprecedented situational awareness. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Taussig, a communications officer aboard the USS Indianapolis, later recalled, "Our ability to process and distribute tactical information gave us a 20-minute advantage in decision-making compared to Japanese commanders. This time, advantage would prove decisive." Task Force 58, commanded by Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, organized a massive aerial response from carriers positioned nearly 300 miles away. The American command network represented a revolution in military operations, what we would now call network-centric warfare. Admiral Mitcher received the initial sighting report at 0820 hours while sipping his morning coffee. By 0822, he had already issued preliminary orders to prepare strike aircraft. By 0830, detailed mission parameters were being transmitted to the task group commanders. Captain Arleigh Burke, Mitcher's Chief of Staff and future Chief of Naval Operations, had developed a streamlined command protocol that eliminated traditional delays in operational planning. In previous eras, Burke explained in post-war lectures at the Naval War College, such an operation would have required hours of planning. We compressed that to minutes through pre-planned responses and distributed authority. 4 carrier groups, the Essex, Bunker Hill, Hancock, and Yorktown, began launching aircraft within 45 minutes of the initial sighting. The scale and speed of this response demonstrated a level of organizational efficiency that would have been inconceivable to naval commanders of earlier generations. American carriers launched a combined 280 aircraft in just 45 minutes, a feat that required thousands of personnel working in perfect synchronization across multiple vessels. The coordination required to launch aircraft from multiple carriers, organize them into strike packages, and dispatch them to intercept a moving target hundreds of miles distant represented a level of operational sophistication that no other navy in the world could match. Rear Admiral Frederick Sherman, commanding Carrier Division 1, observed, "What we accomplished in less than 1 hour would have been considered a multi-day operation in any previous conflict." This quick reaction capability was unprecedented, but the real challenge was whether aircraft could actually sink a vessel designed to withstand bombardment from the heaviest naval guns in existence. Guard this information, because the true test of American ingenuity was about to unfold against the most heavily armored warship ever built. Imagine being Lieutenant Commander James Garrig of VT-17 Torpedo Squadron that morning. You've just been briefed that your target is the most heavily armored warship ever constructed. The mission: fly your relatively fragile Avenger torpedo bomber close enough to the ocean's surface to deliver a torpedo, all while facing walls of anti-aircraft fire from the Yamato's 150 guns. "We knew what we were up against," recalled pilot Jack Sarich years later in declassified interviews. "But we also knew our coordination and tactics would overwhelm them." The briefing room buzzed with focused energy as squadron leaders reviewed the specialized attack patterns developed by naval aviation tactical units. Intelligence officers distributed targeting packets showing precise hull locations where torpedoes would cause maximum damage. These weren't random assignments. They represented the culmination of advanced hydrodynamic analysis conducted at the David Taylor Model Basin in Maryland, where naval architects had created scale models of the Yamato's hull structure. Commander David McCampbell, America's leading naval ace with 34 victories, addressed the assembled pilots with characteristic bluntness. "Gentlemen, today we retire the battleship from naval warfare permanently." The briefing included detailed 3-dimensional renderings of the Yamato derived from intelligence sources so accurate that Japanese naval architects would later express astonishment at their precision. "They showed us exactly where to place our torpedoes," remembered Lieutenant Edwin Hawkins. "It wasn't just about hitting the ship. It was about hitting it at precisely the right points to cause catastrophic structural failure." The mission planning incorporated every facet of American technological superiority, from meteorological forecasting that predicted optimal attack weather to communications protocols that would allow real-time tactical adjustments. The pilots gathered around three-dimensional models of the Yamato, studying its defensive capabilities and vulnerabilities. Lieutenant Richard Winters recalled, "The intelligence briefing was unlike anything we'd experienced before. They knew the exact caliber and positioning of every anti-aircraft gun, the radar capabilities, even the typical response patterns of Japanese gunners. Some wrote letters home, just in case, but the atmosphere was one of determined confidence rather than apprehension. American pilots embodied a unique combination of technical proficiency, tactical creativity, and raw courage that Japanese defenders consistently underestimated. The pilots were confident despite the danger because they had practiced coordinated multi-vector attack approaches that would divide enemy defenses. We had rehearsed these tactics dozens of times," explained Torpedo Squadron Commander Charles Henderson. "The Japanese might have had the biggest guns, but we had the better trained men." Lieutenant Commander Harold Buell of VF-16 captured the prevailing attitude. There was this sense that we were making history, that what we were about to do would change naval warfare forever. If you're impressed by this determination, wait until you see how American technical innovation transformed this courage into decisive military superiority. What the Japanese commanders didn't realize was that American torpedo planes had been equipped with a new top-secret modification to their Mark 13 torpedoes. Documents declassified decades later revealed that enhanced stabilizers allowed pilots to drop torpedoes from higher altitudes and speeds than Japanese anti-aircraft gunners anticipated. The standard Mark 13 torpedo required delivery from altitudes below 800 feet and speeds under 200 knots, parameters that made aircraft extremely vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire. The modified version, designated Mark 13-4A, could be deployed from 2,400 feet at speeds approaching 300 knots, dramatically increasing aircraft survivability. Captain William Salada, head of the Bureau of Aeronautics Torpedo Development Division, had prioritized this modification after analyzing combat losses in earlier engagements. "Our pilots were dying because the weapon demanded tactical suicide," Salada wrote in a classified memorandum. "We needed a torpedo that allowed pilots to survive the delivery." The modifications represented a distinctly American approach to technological development, prioritizing the synergy between human operators and their equipment. Additionally, American ordnance technicians had reconfigured the torpedo detonation mechanisms to explode beneath the keel rather than against the armored hull, targeting a fundamental vulnerability in the Yamato's design that Japanese engineers had never addressed. Professor Howard Saunders of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who consulted on the project, explained in a classified memorandum, "The traditional approach to armoring warships assumes that the primary threat comes from direct impact. Our analysis indicates that underwater explosions transmit energy more efficiently through the hull structure." The ingeniously simple modification effectively bypassed armor that had been designed to withstand direct impact. Dr. Franklin Singer of the Naval Ordnance Laboratory elaborated, "When a torpedo detonates beneath a vessel rather than against its hull, the explosion creates a gas bubble that expands and contracts rapidly. This oscillation creates a water hammer effect that can literally snap a ship's keel." The Mark 13 torpedoes carried 600 pounds of Torpex explosive, 50% more powerful than TNT, and were set to run at precisely 12 feet depth, the optimal position to create a devastating gas bubble under the Yamato's keel. Naval engineers at the California Institute of Technology had conducted extensive testing that confirmed this approach could literally break the back of even the most heavily armored vessel. Dr. William Hofgaard, a renowned naval architect who had defected from Europe, contributed critical insights that led to this revolutionary approach. His calculations demonstrated that a precisely positioned underwater detonation could create hydrostatic pressure sufficient to buckle the strongest hull ever constructed. Captain William Deke Parsons, who helped develop the atomic bomb, had earlier contributed to this torpedo improvement program, noting, "We don't need to penetrate their armor. We just need to change how we deliver the energy." The elegance of this solution typified American technical innovation, recognizing that the objective wasn't to overcome the enemy's strength directly, but to render it irrelevant through lateral thinking. Guard this information carefully, as it explains everything that follows in our story. In my 30 years studying naval warfare documents, I've rarely encountered such an elegant technical solution to what appeared to be an insurmountable defensive advantage. Admiral Seiichi Ito, commanding the Yamato, recorded his growing apprehension as American aircraft approached. Intercepted Japanese communications, later translated, revealed his dawning realization. The Americans approach from multiple directions simultaneously. Our anti-aircraft fire cannot concentrate effectively. The Yamato's bridge crew watched with increasing alarm as their radar operators reported not dozens, but hundreds of aircraft converging on their position. The primitive Type 22 radar aboard Yamato could detect approaching aircraft, but lacked the resolution to distinguish individual formations or coordinate precise fire control solutions, another critical technological disadvantage. "It is like watching a gathering storm," wrote Lieutenant Mitsuru Yoshida, one of the few survivors, in his post-war memoir. "The Americans filled our skies from horizon to horizon." The psychological impact of this overwhelming force projection cannot be overstated. Japanese sailors, indoctrinated to believe in their nation's spiritual superiority, confronted the unmistakable evidence of American material dominance. Commander Jiro Nomura described the moment in his private diary, recovered after the war. "As the American aircraft appeared, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. For the first time, I understood that we were witnessing not just a different scale of war, but a different conception of warfare itself." What particularly unnerved Japanese officers was the precision with which American aircraft maintained their formation spacing despite intense defensive fire. Captain Tameichi Hara, who survived the war to write his memoirs, noted, "American pilots displayed a level of coordination we had not witnessed before. They seemed to anticipate each other's movements as if following a choreographed plan." The contrast between American tactical flexibility and Japanese rigidity became painfully obvious to the defenders. While American squadron leaders made real-time adjustments based on evolving battle conditions, Japanese anti-aircraft directors remained bound to predetermined defense sectors, regardless of where the threats actually materialized. Lieutenant Hideaki Toshima, a fire control officer aboard the Yamato, recalled the frustration. "Our guns were aligned in sectors, but the Americans would approach along the boundaries between sectors, exploiting gaps in our coverage. When we adjusted, they would immediately shift to new approaches." Japanese naval doctrine had never envisioned the precision coordination of nearly 400 aircraft operating in waves. Captain Kosaku Aruga of the Yamato watched helplessly as American fighters systematically neutralized the combat air patrol of obsolete Japanese aircraft. "The American pilots display exceptional confidence," noted a surviving officer's report. "They attack with a precision that suggests extensive training specifically for this encounter." The Japanese had long believed that their spiritual strength, what they called Yamato Damashi, or Japanese spirit, would overcome American material advantages. Now they witnessed the opposite reality. American forces not only possessed material superiority, but displayed levels of courage, coordination, and tactical acumen that matched or exceeded their own. What particularly confounded Japanese commanders was the Americans' apparent willingness to sacrifice tactical advantage to ensure their comrades had clear attack vectors, a level of coordination that Japanese military hierarchy couldn't replicate. The rigid command structure of the Imperial Navy prevented the kind of tactical flexibility that American squadron leaders exercised as a matter of routine. "We were trained to follow orders precisely," recalled Ensign Yokota Yasuhiro. The Americans seemed to share a common understanding of objectives while adapting their individual actions accordingly. This contrast in operational philosophy would prove decisive in the coming engagement. As the American formations closed to attack position, Admiral Ito reportedly turned to his chief of staff and said words that would prove prophetic. "We are about to witness the future of naval warfare, though we will not survive to adapt to it." At precisely 12:41 p.m., the decisive moment arrived. American aircraft executed what military historians now call a hammer and anvil approach. Torpedo planes attacking simultaneously from both port and starboard, while dive bombers occupied anti-aircraft gunners from above. Hellcat fighters swept in at masthead height, strafing anti-aircraft positions with their .50 caliber machine guns, creating momentary gaps in the defensive fire that torpedo bombers exploited with ruthless efficiency. The attack incorporated lessons from earlier operations against smaller Japanese vessels. Commander James Flatley, who had helped develop the tactical doctrine, explained, "We discovered that Japanese anti-aircraft fire discipline broke down when faced with multiple threat axes simultaneously. Their fire control systems couldn't maintain coordination when overloaded." Lieutenant Commander John Hyland, leading the fighter contingent, had instructed his pilots, "Your job isn't to sink the ship, it's to keep those gunners' heads down so our torpedo boys can get through." The fighters approached in pairs, executing a maneuver called the Thatch Weave, named after its inventor, Commander John Thack. This tactic allowed mutual protection while maximizing suppressive fire against Japanese gun positions. The tactic forced the Yamato's gunners to divide their attention across three-dimensional threats. Radar operators aboard the Yamato reported targets approaching from 12 different vectors simultaneously, an unprecedented tactical problem that overwhelmed Japanese fire control systems. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Clifton, leading a squadron of SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers, timed his attack to coincide precisely with the approaching torpedo planes. "We came screaming down from 12,000 feet just as the torpedo planes were making their final approach. The Japanese gunners had to choose, track us or track them. Either choice was fatal. The first wave of torpedoes struck the battleship's port side, causing immediate flooding that induced a 5-degree list. Japanese damage control teams rushed to counterflood compartments on the starboard side, not realizing this was playing directly into the American strategy. By temporarily stabilizing the ship, they were actually optimizing the target for the second wave of torpedo bombers approaching from starboard. Commander Thomas Provost, analyzing the action from the Combat Information Center aboard USS Yorktown, observed, "The Japanese damage control procedures were technically sound but strategically flawed. They responded to each hit in isolation without recognizing the pattern of our attack." This coordination between successive attack waves wasn't coincidental. It resulted from months of tactical development at the U.S. Navy's Advanced Air Combat Training facilities. Recently declassified Naval War College documents reveal that American planners had specifically anticipated Japanese damage control procedures and incorporated them into attack sequencing. Lieutenant Commander Robert Elder of VF-17 later wrote, "Our intelligence briefing predicted exactly how they would respond to initial torpedo hits. When we saw the Yamato's list correct temporarily, we knew our second wave would find her perfectly positioned." The precision timing of the attack waves was no accident either. Strike Coordinator Commander David McCampbell, America's top naval ace with 34 victories, had synchronized the attack waves to arrive at precisely calculated intervals that would prevent Japanese damage control teams from effectively addressing the cumulative damage. "We didn't want to just hit them hard," McCampbell explained in a classified debriefing. "We wanted to hit them in a way that multiplied the effect of each successive wave." The American attack demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of systems disruption, targeting not just the vessel itself, but the organizational processes that kept it functioning. Lieutenant Harvey Johnson, who participated in the third wave, recalled, "We weren't just attacking metal and machinery. We were attacking their decision cycle, their ability to respond coherently." This systematic dismantling of both physical and organizational capabilities represented warfare at a level of sophistication that Japanese commanders had never encountered. What most military accounts overlook, and what newly released naval intelligence documents finally confirm, is that American planners had constructed a full-scale mock-up of the Yamato's vital systems at the Naval Research Laboratory months earlier. The mock-up wasn't just of the external hull, but included detailed reproductions of the vessel's compartmentalization, bulkhead structures, and critical support systems. Using intelligence gathered from Japanese naval blueprints captured at Kwajalein Atoll, American weapons specialists had identified the precise hull locations where torpedo hits would cause catastrophic flooding. The Office of Naval Intelligence had assembled a remarkable dossier on the Yamato through various intelligence sources, submarine periscope observations, aerial reconnaissance photographs, and even information from Japanese shipyard workers recruited through covert operations. Commander Stephen Jurika, an intelligence officer who later became the first U.S. naval attaché to Japan after the war, coordinated the collection effort. We had reports from Chinese laborers who had worked on the Yamato's construction, photographs smuggled out by diplomatic sources, and technical assessments from naval architects who analyzed every scrap of information, Jurika explained in a declassified oral history. Captain Ellis Zacharias, who led the intelligence operation, described it as the most comprehensive analysis ever conducted of an enemy vessel. The intelligence effort represented a revolution in military planning, integrating human intelligence, signals intelligence, and technical analysis into a comprehensive operational picture. This comprehensive intelligence picture allowed American weapons engineers to target specific structural weaknesses in the Yamato's otherwise formidable defenses. The analysis revealed that despite its impressive armor belt, the Yamato had vulnerable seams where different armor sections joined, particularly at frames 113 and 172. These junction points represented stress concentrations that could be exploited by precisely placed underwater explosions. Captain Jasper Holmes, who served with the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, FRUPAC, recalled, "We knew more about the Yamato's vulnerabilities than most of her own officers did. Our submarines had been tracking her since she was commissioned, and we had constructed a three-dimensional vulnerability profile unlike anything attempted before." Attack squadron leaders were briefed on these specific target points just hours before the mission. "The precision of American torpedo impacts cannot be attributed to luck," wrote naval historian Jonathan Parker. "The pattern of hits shows unmistakable evidence of deliberate targeting of structural weaknesses identified through intelligence analysis." The operation represented a new paradigm in warfare, the comprehensive integration of intelligence with operations. Admiral Kelly Turner, who reviewed the operation plans, remarked, "This is the difference between merely overwhelming an enemy and surgically dismantling them." The third and fourth waves of torpedo bombers specifically targeted the area where the Yamato's armor belt joined the lower hull plating, a seam that represented the only practical vulnerability in the vessel's otherwise impenetrable defensive scheme. Commander Thomas Moorer, who later became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, observed in a classified assessment, "The operation against Yamato represented the perfect synthesis of intelligence, technology, and tactics." The level of detail in the American attack plan astounded even veteran naval officers. Captain George Montgomery, who reviewed the operation for the Navy's Bureau of Ships, wrote, "This wasn't just an attack, it was a precisely engineered demolition based on structural analysis that would have impressed the most sophisticated civil engineers. In 2 decades researching naval archives, I've never encountered a more brilliant synthesis of intelligence, engineering analysis, and tactical execution." By 2:23 p.m., just 2 hours after the attack began, The Yamato had capsized and sunk, taking 355 crewmen with it. The most telling evidence of American dominance comes from the statistics. 386 American aircraft participated in the attack, only 10 were lost. Not a single American surface vessel was damaged. The Yamato had been struck by at least 11 torpedoes and 6 bombs, a concentration of firepower that no vessel, regardless of armor protection, could withstand. Naval analysis conducted after the war determined that the pattern of torpedo hits had been so precisely placed that they created a cascading structural failure throughout the vessel's central third. Submarine hydrophone operators 50 miles away reported hearing a series of sequential structural failures as the Yamato's keel buckled under the precisely calculated hydraulic pressures. The ship didn't just sink, wrote engineering analyst Robert Winters. It experienced catastrophic structural disintegration exactly as our models had predicted. Admiral Nimitz, reviewing the preliminary damage assessment, reportedly remarked, "This wasn't a battle. It was an engineering solution to a naval problem." Lieutenant Victor Schutz, piloting an observation aircraft from USS Yorktown, captured the final moments on gun camera footage only recently released from Naval Archives. The Yamato's stern rose high out of the water as she began her final plunge. Even as she died, her massive form commanded respect, a monument to an outdated vision of naval power that could not survive the American Revolution in warfare. The psychological impact of the vessel's destruction extended far beyond its immediate tactical significance. For Japanese naval personnel throughout the Pacific, the sinking of Yamato represented the death of a symbol, concrete proof that their nation's maritime power had been decisively broken. The Yamato's massive 18-inch main gun turrets, each weighing more than 2,500 tons, tore free from their mounts as the vessel capsized, creating massive underwater explosions as they plunged to the ocean floor. The ship's magazine detonated during the final plunge, creating an explosion visible from 100 miles away. Commander Roger Simpson, observing from a PBM Mariner patrol aircraft, described it as a volcanic eruption that momentarily created a new island where the Yamato had been. The explosions were so massive that American submarines monitoring the engagement initially reported nuclear weapons had been deployed. Admiral Chester Nimitz's after-action report, declassified in 1973, stated simply, "The operation against the Yamato demonstrates conclusively that the era of the battleship has passed." The brevity of the statement belied its profound implications for naval warfare. Even more revealing were the intercepted communications from Japanese naval headquarters in Tokyo. According to documents translated by Naval Intelligence, Admiral Somu Toyota reported to Emperor Hirohito, "The Americans have achieved complete mastery of naval warfare. Their carrier-based aviation has rendered our surface fleet strategy obsolete." The Emperor's reported response, according to the intelligence intercept, was telling. How could their pilots show such skill and courage? The question reflected the fundamental misconception that had guided Japanese strategy throughout the war. The belief that American technical prowess came at the expense of fighting spirit. The answer lay not just in individual bravery, but in America's systematic approach to warfare, integrating technology, intelligence, and human factors into a comprehensive superiority that adversaries simply could not match. Commander Minoru Genda, one of the architects of the Pearl Harbor attack, later admitted, "The Yamato operation revealed that Americans had achieved something we thought impossible. They had married technical superiority with fighting spirit in a combination we could not counter." Now you understand why the Yamato, despite representing the pinnacle of battleship technology, was effectively obsolete before it ever left port. The sinking of the Yamato reverberated far beyond the immediate tactical victory. It represented the definitive end of battleship warfare, a revolutionary shift in naval doctrine that the Americans had pioneered while other navies clung to outdated concepts. This paradigm shift wasn't merely technical, but philosophical. American naval planners had recognized that projecting power across vast oceanic distances required a fundamentally different approach. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations during World War II, had articulated this vision years earlier. The essence of naval power is mobility. The capacity to deliver overwhelming force at the decisive point depends not on the concentration of armor, but on the projection of power. The Carrier Task Force concept developed by the U.S. Navy became the template for every major naval power in the post-war world. What we demonstrated against the Japanese confirms what some of us have advocated for decades. Naval power in the modern era depends on air superiority, not gun caliber. British Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, who witnessed American carrier operations in the Pacific, wrote in his classified assessment, "The Americans have perfected a system of naval air operations that represents the most significant advancement in maritime warfare since the introduction of steam propulsion." The British Royal Navy, which had pioneered carrier aviation but failed to develop it to its full potential, completely reorganized its fleet structure based on American operational models after observing Task Force 58's effectiveness. Even the Soviet Union, when developing its naval strategy during the Cold War, acknowledged in classified documents that the American model of carrier aviation demonstrates a superior understanding of modern naval warfare. Admiral Sergei Gorshkov, architect of the modern Soviet Navy, privately conceded, "The Americans redefined naval warfare while we were still thinking in 19th century terms." A captured memorandum from Japanese Naval Staff College, dated August 1945, contained a remarkable admission. "We committed the cardinal error of building the world's greatest battleship at precisely the moment when the Americans were rendering battleships obsolete." The document further acknowledged, "American naval innovation progressed along a trajectory we failed to anticipate, creating a form of maritime warfare against which our traditional advantages became liabilities." The success against Yamato wasn't merely a victory of quantity, as some historical accounts suggest. Admiral Harry Yarnell, whose pioneering carrier exercises in the 1930s had predicted the obsolescence of battleships, only to be ignored by conservative naval planners, felt vindicated by the Yamato operation. It represented a comprehensive American mastery of the qualitative factors that determine military superiority: technology integration, tactical innovation, intelligence utilization, and coordinated execution. Admiral John McCain Sr., grandfather of the late senator, summarized the significance. "The sinking of Yamato wasn't just the destruction of an enemy vessel. It was the end of an era and the beginning of American maritime supremacy that continues to this day." The psychological impact extended beyond military circles. Emperor Hirohito, according to his personal translator, was profoundly affected by the Yamato's destruction. "If our greatest ship can be destroyed so easily," he reportedly asked his cabinet, "what hope remains for our nation?" Perhaps most significantly, the victory demonstrated that American industrial capacity could not only produce more ships and aircraft than its adversaries, but could simultaneously advance technological innovation at a pace that left opponents perpetually behind the curve. As Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal noted in a classified Pentagon assessment, "Our advantage isn't simply in producing more. It's in our unique ability to innovate faster than our adversaries can adapt." This capacity for rapid innovation, combined with massive production capability, created a compounding advantage that Japanese strategists had never anticipated in their war planning. The legacy of this decisive American victory extended well beyond World War II. The operational concepts pioneered by Task Force 58, distributed naval power projection, coordinated multi-vector strikes, and real-time tactical adaptation, became cornerstones of American military doctrine. The officers who participated in the Yamato operation went on to shape NATO naval strategy during the Cold War. Admiral Arleigh Burke, who helped plan the attack, later served as Chief of Naval Operations, where he incorporated the lessons of carrier warfare into America's nuclear deterrent strategy. When asked about the significance of the operation years later, Burke remarked, "What we proved against Yamato was that technology only matters when you have the doctrine and training to employ it effectively." That principle still guides our approach today. The emphasis on integrated operations, combining intelligence, logistics, communications, and tactical execution into a synchronized whole, became the hallmark of American military planning. General Curtis LeMay, who would later head Strategic Air Command, studied the Yamato operation intensively while developing America's nuclear deterrent posture. "What impressed me," LeMay wrote in his memoirs, "wasn't just the destruction of the target, but the systematic process that enabled it." The Yamato operation demonstrated that complex military problems could be solved through analytical approaches. Captain Frederick Moosbrugger, who commanded one of the attack groups, later developed the Haystack Carrier Defense Formation that protected American task forces throughout the Cold War. The decentralized command principles that allowed American squadron leaders to adapt tactics in real time became embedded in naval aviation training. Captain James Thatch, creator of the Thatch Weave fighter tactic, established the Navy's Advanced Fighter Weapons School based on lessons learned from the Yamato engagement. "What we demonstrated against the Japanese super battleship," Thatch explained, "was that superior tactics could multiply the effectiveness of our technology beyond what engineers had envisioned." Even more remarkably, tactical communication procedures developed for the Yamato operation evolved into the modern command, control, communications, computers, and intelligence C4I systems that give American forces their decisive edge in contemporary conflicts. The mission also revolutionized naval architecture worldwide. As Admiral Hyman Rickover noted in congressional testimony, the sinking of the Yamato proved conclusively that no amount of armor can protect a surface vessel from coordinated air attack. This fundamental insight drove our shift toward mobility, distributed systems, and eventually nuclear propulsion. Naval architects completely reconceptualized warship design based on the lessons of Yamato. Captain William Sims, head of the Bureau of Ships Design Division, explained the paradigm shift. Before Yamato, naval architecture focused on withstanding hits. After Yamato, we focused on avoiding them, emphasizing speed, electronic countermeasures, and distributed defensive systems rather than armor. U.S. Navy's subsequent development of nuclear-powered aircraft carriers represented the logical culmination of insights gained from the Yamato operation, creating vessels that could project overwhelming air power while maintaining operational independence for months at a time. When USS Enterprise, America's first nuclear carrier, was commissioned in 1961, Admiral Elmo Zumwalt observed, "This vessel embodies the lessons we learned 16 years ago against Yamato. Mobility, distributed power, and coordinated strength will always triumph over concentrated armor." The intellectual legacy of the operation extended into America's strategic posture throughout the Cold War. As nuclear strategist Herman Kahn noted, the Yamato operation demonstrated a central principle of American military thought, identifying an adversary's center of gravity and developing specific capabilities to neutralize it, regardless of its apparent strength. The precision with which American forces dispatched the Yamato continues to influence military thinking today. Modern carrier strike groups operate according to principles first demonstrated in April 1945. The multi-layered defensive systems of contemporary American carrier groups, Aegis cruisers, destroyer screens, and FA-18 combat air patrols represent evolutionary refinements of the protective formations first developed by Task Force 58. Admiral Thomas Hayward, Chief of Naval Operations during the Reagan administration, explicitly connected modern carrier operations to the Yamato precedent. The fundamental concept remains unchanged, projecting overwhelming power from mobile platforms while maintaining a defensive screen that prevents adversaries from closing to effective range. When Naval War College students analyze current maritime strategy, instructors still reference the Yamato operation as the definitive case study in asymmetric advantage. Professor Milan Vago, a leading naval theorist, characterizes the engagement as the perfect example of operational art, identifying the enemy's critical vulnerability despite apparent strength. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program incorporates attack coordination systems conceptually similar to those pioneered by Task Force 58. General Mark Welsh, former Air Force Chief of Staff, noted during a classified briefing, "The fundamental principle remains unchanged. Our ability to coordinate multi-platform attacks represents our decisive advantage." The concepts of network-centric warfare and distributed lethality that guide current American military doctrine trace their intellectual lineage directly to the Yamato operation. Admiral William Owens, who championed network-centric warfare as vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, acknowledged, "What we now call information dominance was demonstrated in embryonic form against Yamato, the ability to collect, process, and act on information faster than the adversary." The Pentagon's Naval Surface Warfare Center continues to refine torpedo hydrodynamics based on principles first validated against the Yamato. Dr. Elizabeth Crawford, a senior hydrodynamics researcher, explained, "We're still building on insights gained from analyzing how precisely placed underwater explosions affected Yamato's hull structure. Contemporary unmanned aerial vehicles execute coordinated attack patterns that would be immediately recognizable to the pilots who struck Yamato." Colonel Richard Johnson, who helped develop drone swarm tactics, admitted, "We're essentially digitizing attack concepts that proved devastating against Yamato, simultaneous multi-vector approaches that overwhelm defensive systems." Recently declassified Pentagon assessments reveal that potential adversaries still struggle to counter the fundamental advantages of American carrier aviation. A 2021 Naval War College simulation concluded that the coordinated strike capabilities first demonstrated against the Yamato remain relevant against even the most advanced defensive systems. When Chinese naval architects unveiled their first aircraft carrier in 2012, American intelligence analysts noted striking similarities to operational concepts pioneered by Task Force 58. "They're trying to replicate capabilities we perfected 70 years ago," observed a senior naval intelligence officer, "but they lack the institutional knowledge and training culture that makes our system work." The intellectual legacy of the Yamato operation is even embedded in modern military education. At the Naval War College, the engagement is studied as the exemplar of effects-based operations, focusing on systemic outcomes rather than attrition. Senior defense officials, speaking on condition of anonymity, confirmed that America's current naval dominance stems directly from institutional knowledge developed in operations like the Yamato strike. "What we demonstrated against Yamato wasn't just tactical superiority," explained a senior Pentagon strategist. "It was a fundamentally different understanding of how to integrate humans and technology into an unbeatable system." When American forces executed Operation Desert Storm in 1991, Commanding General Norman Schwarzkopf explicitly cited the Yamato paradigm. "Like our predecessors in the Pacific, we're not trying to match their strengths. We're making their strengths irrelevant." The underlying lesson remains unchanged. Technological superiority, combined with tactical innovation and exceptional training, creates military advantages that potential adversaries cannot overcome simply through conventional means. The sinking of the Yamato represents more than a historical footnote. It embodies a uniquely American approach to warfare that emphasizes innovation, coordination, and precision over brute force. When Admiral Raymond Spruance was asked after the war about the significance of the victory, he replied, "The Japanese built a fortress. We built a system that made fortresses irrelevant." This insight captures the essence of American military philosophy, identifying adversaries' centers of gravity and developing solutions that render their strengths meaningless. The operation showcased distinctly American military virtues, adaptability, teamwork across service branches, and the seamless integration of intelligence with operations. Rear Admiral Edward Ewan, who commanded the carrier air groups, observed, "What distinguishes American forces isn't just our technology or numbers. It's our unique ability to integrate multiple capabilities toward a single objective." Most significantly, it demonstrated America's unparalleled ability to identify an adversary's center of gravity and develop precisely targeted solutions to neutralize it. This analytical approach to warfare, identifying the critical nodes in enemy systems and precisely targeting them, has become the hallmark of American military operations, from Desert Storm to present-day special operations. General Colin Powell, reflecting on American military doctrine, identified this approach as the Yamato Principle, developing specific capabilities that negate an adversary's primary advantages rather than competing symmetrically. In those 10 critical minutes when American torpedoes struck their precisely calculated impact points, we witnessed the essence of American military excellence, the seamless integration of technology, tactics, and human courage. As Admiral Chester Nimitz observed in his personal papers, "The Japanese built the world's greatest battleship. We made it irrelevant." This philosophy of rendering the enemy's strengths irrelevant through innovation, rather than matching them symmetrically, continues to define American military dominance. When America faced Soviet numerical superiority during the Cold War, we again applied the lessons of Yamato, developing technological and tactical solutions that made numbers irrelevant. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara explicitly cited the Yamato case when developing America's flexible response doctrine. The lesson is that qualitative superiority, properly applied, overcomes quantitative advantage. Military academies worldwide now teach the Yamato operation as a case study in asymmetric advantage, how technological innovation combined with tactical brilliance can overcome seemingly insurmountable material advantages. The Yamato operation exemplifies this distinctive approach. Australian defense strategist Hugh White characterized the engagement as the perfect expression of American military philosophy, neutralizing enemy strength through innovative application of technology and tactics rather than brute force competition. The lesson of the Yamato endures. No adversary, regardless of size or apparent strength, can prevail against an opponent who fundamentally changes the rules of engagement through superior innovation and execution. German Bundeswehr analyst Heinrich Miller concluded in a NATO assessment, "What makes American military power unique is not just its scale, but its intelligent application." In the annals of military history, few examples better illustrate America's unique capacity to redefine the parameters of warfare through technological mastery and operational excellence. As former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates observed during a Naval Academy commencement address, "The true strength of American military power has never been in our weapons alone, but in how we integrate those weapons with exceptional people, innovative doctrine, and strategic vision." The operation against Yamato represents the perfect expression of that uniquely American approach to warfare. The principles demonstrated in those decisive minutes south of Japan continue to guide American military thinking decades later, ensuring that our forces maintain the decisive edge that has preserved American security and global stability for generations. As we face emerging challenges in the 21st century, the fundamental lesson of Yamato remains our North Star. American ingenuity, properly focused and executed, can overcome any adversary regardless of apparent strength.